We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 125. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today, we bring on Dr. Tanya Peres to talk about site assessments after a significant weather event. Let's get to it. Dr. Tanya Peres is an associate professor of anthropology at Florida State University. She examines the various ways that humans incorporate animals into both their cuisine and cultural worldview in the Americas. Her research is two-pronged: foodways in ancient America and the non-food roles of animals in Native American societies. Dr. Peres' foodways research includes ancient snail farming, that sounds amazing, garden hunting, turkey domestication, bone grease production, the acculturation of indigenous and Spanish foodways during the first Spanish period in Florida, and the fishing foodways of the Olmec in Mesoamerica. Her interest in human-animal relationships extends beyond food to the symbolic and technological uses of animals. The projects in this strand of her research are multidisciplinary and make use of primary archaeological data, curated data, and heritage collections. Working with Dr. Peres' research collaborators, they have identified ancient human amulets and use of bears for grease, re-examined the role of garfish in scratching rituals, I don't know what that is, and use of Eastern box turtles for percussive instruments. It sounds like we need to get Dr. Peres on for a lot more things. All right, welcome to the podcast, everyone. Welcome, Paul. How's it going in the quarantine world that we live in today?
It's okay. We're hiding out in the country, my wife, my daughter, and I, and they're working remotely, and I'm still on spring break, so I'm just doing projects. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I'm not on indefinite spring break, but did just get off a field project. And I feel like it's important that we mention the date on all these recordings because things are changing in the world so often, and we record about a week and a half ahead of time. So we were recording this on March 24th, a Tuesday. If the world has ended by next week when we release this, then it won't matter. But if it hasn't, at least we'll know when we recorded this and what the current world climate was. But enough of that. We are going to not talk about the coronavirus today, which is nice. We're going to talk about archaeology. And a while back, and I'm going to put this link in the show notes, so check it out over at archpodnet.com/archaeotech /125 for this episode, because a link to an episode that we had a while back is referring to the paper that we're going to talk about now. And the paper is also linked in the show notes, so you can go find it there. But we could not get the guest on, the author on, for various reasons. So Paul and I just talked about it anyway. Well, now we have the author on, as I mentioned in the introduction and the bio, and I'd like to welcome Tanya to the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Great. Yeah. So why don't you just start by giving us basically your abstract version of the paper, and we'll start from there.
Okay, so the paper is Finding the Positive and the Negative, Archaeology and Data Collection in the Face of Natural Disasters. And basically what this does is we try to put a positive spin on the work that we did following the 2010 floods in Nashville. There was, of course, a lot of destruction to modern properties, modern lives, and that kind of thing. But the archaeology, the cultural resources were pretty hard hit as well. And Aaron Dieterwolf, my co-author, and I undertook a survey of some of these sites along the bank line. There were some parameters for the sites that we chose to look at. So ones that were impacted the greatest by flooding and erosion of the Cumberland River following that event. Mm-hmm. So we went to these previously recorded sites. We did site assessments. We did sampling, and this took months to do because it was an emergency project, right? An emergency survey. So we had to work it into our regular work schedules, which included teaching, multiple classes, and other projects that we were working on. So we did it, one day a week here, a couple days a week there with student volunteers, and took all of that data and were able to help different agencies understand what had happened to sites that they were responsible for. It helped some private landowners understand what they even had on their property. It strengthened relationships that Aaron and I had with archaeologists and managers and other agencies outside of our own, which I was at a university in Tennessee at the time, and Aaron works for the Tennessee Division of Archaeology. And then kind of also get a lot of interesting research out of it so that we could share that with the world, basically, about an area that had not been published on very much, if at all, in some cases in Middle Tennessee.
Great. I'm kind of curious. After these floods, what kind of damage were you finding? And these were sites along the river, I take it, right?
Correct. Yeah. We looked at the site files, and we had 128 previously recorded sites in the site files. Now, that's problematic in and of itself, just because when people were recording sites in the site files, various amateur archaeologists or professional archaeologists, they're checking check boxes, which I'm sure you've all seen. If you've seen a site file form, you fit your site into the predetermined categories. And so in that sense, some would say, oh, there are lithics here, a lithic scatter. Well, what's a lithic scatter going to look like after it's been heavily eroded by a rushing river, right? A rushing mass of water coming down the Cumberland River. So the damage that we were dealing with at first was, okay, there's erosion that's happened to these sites. Mm-hmm. And then further beyond that, some of the sites, especially the ones that had shell-bearing components to them, what people might think of as shell middens, which are highly visible from the river and the bank line, were then often looted after erosion, because the river coming down, rising 30 some odd feet over flood stage, taking off just massive chunks of bank line, exposed new deposits of the site, right? Ones that had never been seen before. So there are what we consider like professional looters that would come through the area and pick at the sites, dig out deposits at the site, looking for particular types of artifacts, mostly those that tend to be buried with Native American remains in archaic period sites.
A variety of the different kinds of damage, both natural and then subsequently man-made.
That's right, anthropogenic, exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you're discussing some of these, especially the water impacts from the river and catastrophic weather events based on climate change. However, regardless of climate change, this can't be the first time a prehistoric site on that river has been damaged by a weather event, unless all the older ones are just gone now and the riverbank is widened. I guess that's a possibility.
Well, that happens.
And it's coming in.
That's for sure in some places. So some of these sites, the archaic sites in particular, those are the ones that are overwhelmingly shell-bearing, are very deeply buried. So if you're at ground surface, you have to dig a meter before you reach the top of them. You have to have a pretty forceful flooding event to cut away at the bank line the way it happened. And as far as we could tell in our research, that had not happened very often in this stretch of the river, because the Army Corps of Engineers controls that river, right? It has a series of lock and dams along it. And so the water has been pretty well under control until big events like this happen. And as far as we know, one hadn't happened in over 100 years.
What was it that caused this one event to be so much more damaging than previous ones over the last 100 years?
Oh, well, it's a whole meteorological event that happened in the Mid-South, but, and I lived through it. I was living in Murfreesboro outside of Nashville at the time. And we had days and days of rain there was a rain line of band of rainstorms that basically just trained over Middle Tennessee. So it was dumping feet of rain. And I don't really recall or understand maybe all the mechanics of it, but because the Army Corps of Engineers controls the rivers and there are pools behind the locks, upstream from the locks that are big lakes that people use for fishing and boating and whatever kind of recreational activities, those started to overfill, so they would release water. And that release of water, plus all the rain that was happening, flooded vast areas downriver from the dams.
Gotcha.
I wouldn't guess from your bio that this was a primary research concern of yours. What brought this to your attention and caused you guys to get into this? Well,
we were living in the area, so there's, low geographical proximity was part of it. But also I've had long time interest in shell-bearing sites. Mostly mine have been marine because I'm from Florida. I've worked in Florida up until I moved to Kentucky and then Tennessee. And my dissertation work was in Panama on a Pacific coast shell midden site. So I've always had an interest in shell midden sites. Aaron and I talked about the ones that the couple that we knew about on the Cumberland for years, and, had maybe visited them here and there where they were accessible, but I never really had time to think about doing a big research project on them. And then when this happened, and he, as one of the state archaeologists, went out with some of the other archaeologists from that office to survey the damage and sent me pictures. And so I went out the next time and I was like, we have to do something, because within a month of the flooding event, the looting was taking place. As soon as the water subsided and people could get out on the river, they started looting these sites. And so my interest was in, the shell sites because they're so interesting to me anyway, but also just the loss of the resource.
Do you have a sense of how many of these resources had been previously recorded by archaeological or CRM projects or what have you in the past, and how many were, quote, brand new to science, and you guys were kind of discovering them for the first time and then finding evidence of looting?
So we had 128 previously recorded sites out of the site files that we had GPS locations for. And so we had a boat. We basically went up and down the river with our GPS, relocating these sites. There was only a few that we could not relocate, probably because they were completely gone from erosion. We did not identify any new sites at that time, because to identify a new deposit, they would have had been pretty obvious, right, on the landscape. And so I think the shell-bearing sites, they're pretty massive on the Cumberland, they can be pretty sizable. So they're already known and in the site file. So we recorded no new sites. We did record the loss of a handful of sites. In one instance, there was one site that we sampled, and what we sampled was basically the last of the deposits there. So at least we have that data for science, right?
Right.
Yeah, indeed.
You didn't have any new sites exposed then by this event, because we've all seen cases where there's a weather event or, a landslide or construction or something that exposes a previously unknown site. Did you not find those, or were you not looking for them?
We just didn't find them. I mean, we were surprised that we thought for sure we would find, a dozen more sites, but we didn't. Some of it has to do, I think, with the fact that we were literally just looking at the bank line, because that, in some places, it's 20 and 30 feet from ground surface down to the top of the water where our boat was. So we're on a boat looking for our previously recorded sites and then any evidence of new sites, and we just didn't find any.
Gotcha.
I'm curious about the looting too. Did you find anyone? I mean, you guys were out there pretty quick, it sounds like. Did you find anyone that was actively looting, or was anybody caught? Or if not, or also in addition to, I guess I should say, what kind of evidence of looting did you find?
Okay, so we did not catch anybody in the act of looting. What evidence did we find? We found sometimes they would leave tools behind, which which consist of things like it's almost like a long piece of rebar that you would use to tamp dirt. I guess it is actually the kind of tool you use to tamp dirt down in around a fence post. I cannot think of the name of that, but we found things like that. And also the marks, those leave really specific marks in the soil. And so we found that evidence. Probably the most disturbing evidence we found of looting was when they would find a grave, a burial, and they weren't in it for the human remains. They were in it for the artifacts. So the human remains would get tossed down the riverbank, down into the shoreline, partially to hide them from view so other looters wouldn't see them and then come and loot that, come and dig in that area where that person was basically claiming as their own. So in our article, we outline the steps we took when we found those situations, which I'm sad to say it was more than one site that had that happen to. And so in some cases, things were reburied on site. In other cases, things were collected and put on the NAGPRA inventory at the Tennessee Division of Archaeology after documentation.
Wow, that is next level looting, hiding human remains so other looters can't find your looted stuff.
Right. These people are for the most part locals. They know the river very well.
Sure.
I have had personal run-in with at least one of them when I was teaching my field school at one of these sites in 2012. It went from pleasant to unpleasant rather quickly. And I'm sure that they're still out there because they're local people doing, up to their tricks. But there's, the only way to to have them arrested is to catch them in the act.
Oh, sure.
They have to be caught in the act.
Do you know if most of that happens at night?
Does it no, I think it happens during the day, but I mean, there's no one there to stop them because unless it's like one of the wildlife personnel that's out there patrolling for poachers or people that are illegally fishing or, don't have the right boat tags or whatever. But for the most part, if it's on private property, which some of these sites are, the private property owner has to catch them and press charges. And that's just not going to happen. People are not really looking. So, I mean, we had people when I was working at one of these sites in 2012 with my field school students, we could hear people pull up in boats, like down on the bank line, because we're a couple stories up from where the river levels are, and hear them talking and whatnot. And we just tell them they had to leave because it was private property. So, yeah, it was an interesting situation.
Yeah, speaking of private property, how did you contact some of the landowners? Because I'm assuming when you said private property, there must be a mixture of public and private land along this river. And how were you received by the landowners? Or did you guys even need to contact them directly ahead of time, or you just run down the river and see what you see?
Well, when we were on the river, I mean, for the most part, we were in... The bank lines are controlled by the Army Corps of Engineer at that point. Like they have a certain jurisdiction. So we had permits with them, right? We had our ARPA permit and so we were dealing with them. We had state permits and we worked with folks from the Metro Nashville staff that have property along the river as well. In terms of private landowners, we did reach out to them and some were like, okay, like you can have my permission to go on the property, and others kind of just don't even want to know what they have. And I won't name any names
of course.
Of landowners, but it was a mixed reaction to what we were doing, particularly if there was any kind of perceived economic impact to the business. They didn't want to know they didn't want us there.
Right.
Sure.
So,
but this was done also pretty much ad hoc as you went through, or did you have an overarching plan for how you're going to reach out to them?
No, Aaron took mostly care of that. So he, would reach out to them and talk to them. And, we worked with what we had. We did the best we could with the situation. So I would say that the public, the community in general was very excited for the work we were doing, and that was well received. So.
Great.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a good point to take our first break, and we will come back and keep talking about this with Tanya Peres. Back in a second. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code Archaeotech. That's ARCHAEOTECH.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals. That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
Hi, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 125. Today we're talking with Dr. Tanya Peres about an article that we actually discussed back in episode 93. Dr. Peres, you'd mentioned something in your intro to us that caught my attention. You said that you were working with different agencies, and I was wondering which different agencies you were working with and how you coordinated with them, how you received, kind of follow-up question on how you worked with local landowners.
So with the agencies that we worked with, they were state and federal agencies, and I would say we were very well received. I don't think any of us felt like our toes were being stepped on, or nobody overstepped their boundaries. We all had different resources we could bring to the table in dealing with the aftermath of the floods. Aaron and I had received a National Science Foundation RAPID grant, which is intended for rapid responses in situations like this. So we had some funding, which enabled us to get a boat, get some other equipment that we needed, and spend the time out on the river dealing with these sites when other people may not have been able to drop everything and do that. I will say, with that being said, there were archaeologists with like the Army Corps of Engineers that went out with us. Some of the sites are on property owned by a federal prison. So we were dealing with all kinds of people, Nashville District Park Rangers. We ended up doing a training program for federal law enforcement and Homeland Security, which also included assistant U.S. attorneys. So there was a lot of people that got interested in the work we were doing at the time and then the outcomes of that work. And it was really fun, right, to be a part of, as an academic, to be a part of a project with all these people that are kind of on the front lines of these issues every day, and bring what I could to the table. So that was really interesting.
Okay. One of the last segments of sections of the paper, you talk about some positive outcomes and partnerships, and you mentioned needing that at the beginning of the paper as well. What kind of relationships have been developed as a response of these efforts, or at least as a response to, the significant weather events that you're discussing as they happened?
Well, I think Aaron and I were pretty lucky that we kind of knew some of these people already before this happened, and that allowed us to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, clearly the flood has happened. We've noticed these sites have been eroded. We've been out looking. We're getting this funding to go out and survey them. How can we all work together on this? So we already had kind of strong relationships with those individuals and those agencies. And since then, we see each other at conferences, and it's great, right? It's a great working relationship, and being able to know that they are as invested in these types of projects as we were was really helpful. And we had student volunteers with us, undergraduate students with us. So it was really great for them to see that, and to see that, archaeologists, no matter what job title they hold or what agency or institution they work for, all have the cultural resources kind of in front and center of their mission and take it very seriously.
That's good to hear. The event that you're writing about was 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
So have you maintained these relationships? Are there any projects that are ongoing that were initiated back in your project?
Well, we actually have been wrapping up this section of the work on the Cumberland River, which we just this past year published a co-edited book on. Aaron and I are the co-editors of the book. And we had archaeologists that contributed chapters from multiple universities and agencies. So that, to me, kind of like was the culmination of that project. Not to say that there's not still research to be done or still other types of work to be done. It's just that, 10 years down the road, you want to wrap up something that you started. And so we had some publications, a lot of conference presentations, the book that we published, plus I think one of the big takeaways, the training program that we gave for all those various people, that range from park rangers to Army Corps of Engineers staff to U.S. attorneys. And then also we've given a lot of public talks on this. And the public response has been really great. And to me, that kind of lives on, in that this is still a project we can still talk about. The outcomes are still relevant. People are still interested. So, yeah, there was a lot of good that came out of a really bad situation.
I'm actually curious about the public engagement. Do you have any, have you done any? Do you plan to have any kind of ongoing citizen scientist type of monitoring going on? So there is a project. Well, that's tricky, right? Because who's going to manage the project? Who owns the property? Who should be in charge of it? I know in Tennessee, the Tennessee Valley Authority has something called the 10,000 Eyes Archaeological Site Stewardship Program. And that
helps to train basically citizen scientists to go out and monitor sites on TVA property. There's nothing like that for Army Corps of Engineer property in the middle part of Tennessee, but I would say that are raising awareness of the types of activities that happen. Well, maybe hopefully that since we've raised this awareness that people would report it if they saw it. But there's nothing other than, like people from the Corps of Engineer or from Metro Nashville's parks that have property along the river, or from the Division of Archaeology's offices going out and monitoring these sites, which I know that people do. I have a former undergraduate student of mine from Middle Tennessee State University who now works for the Tennessee Department of Transportation. And after the tornadoes that went through Nashville, was that not quite a month ago, I guess, maybe about a month ago?
Yeah.
A big chunk of one of these sites or the property where one of these sites is located was hit by the tornado. And she sent me the Google Earth map and was like, this is the site that we worked on. It looks a lot different than it did a couple weeks ago. And I'm like, it sure did. But luckily where that tornado hit, fortunately, was not a place where there were any cultural deposits, because we tested a lot of acres on that property. And that was one of those areas where it was free and clear. So, there are people interested around that are keeping an eye out.
You're in Florida now, and I know for a fact Florida's got a lot of sand, a lot of rain, and a lot of water. So are there any programs? Are you looking at anywhere down there where these sorts of relationships could be made or site assessments done, or are they already doing it?
Florida has a very active archaeology profession, not to say that other places don't, but there are a lot of different agencies in Florida from the federal level down. And so I'm at the Florida State University, and our department offices happen to be on the second floor of a building that we share with the National Park Service's Southeastern Archaeological Center. And there are archaeologists there that are, deal with this within the national parks in the Southeast, including parks in Florida. There are archaeologists that work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network, which is based out of the University of West Florida, but they have regional offices all over the state. And they have devised the Heritage Monitoring Scouts program. They coordinate that. And so they train, anybody that's interested to monitor sites on public properties. So they've been working on that for a number of years. And they host periodic trainings throughout the state to get people up to speed on what they need to do to belong to that program. So there's that. And then I think all the active researchers that work in Florida, a lot of us do work in coastal settings. So we're all, aware of what can happen and what will happen. I worked on a site in 2016 in the St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, and we were there May through June. And during the June period of our field work, we were hit by a tropical storm with very little notice. Like we were on a Friday morning knowing that we were just going to get rain this weekend. So let's make sure we really, close up the site tight. By the afternoon, it's a tropical storm. So now we've got to, modify our arrangements for closing up these units for the weekend, which then turned into 4 days. Fortunately, most of our units were fine. We had one that the water table levels were so high that we could never get it to dry out in the bottom of the unit, even though we pumped it out and everything, it kept filling back up. So all that rain did a number on it. But yeah, we're in Florida. I feel like we're very intimately aware of the problems that can happen with flooding, but also coastal erosion. And in some cases, there's, people are doing things to try to mitigate that. In other cases, there's no mitigation that could ever happen to save a site. So the best they can do is sample it and document it.
Right.
So back up to Tennessee and along the Cumberland River, do you have other plans to look at any of its tributary or other sections of that river, establish some kind of baseline for it?
My dream project, so maybe not in the next couple of years, but gearing up for something like this would be to do a much broader survey of that whole area. So not just along the river, but reaching out a little further inland to look for other sites like terrestrial sites, but also maybe like rock shelter sites or that type of thing. That area is not super well surveyed, and we know there are a lot of Mississippian period sites, so late prehistoric sites in the area, and we don't know as much about the Archaic period in that area. So I would like to personally oversee a large scale survey that goes further back away from the bank line on both sides to see what else is out there and how then all those sites tie in together.
Speaking of that and kind of widening this out, I'm always thinking, probably because of this podcast and other podcasts that I host, I talk to people from all over the country, all over the world, and tend to think that way, right?
Right.
Because these problems you're experiencing are not just in Tennessee, of course. I mean, they're literally everywhere.
Yeah, it's a global situation, right?
It really is. It really is. So thinking of the places that we can actually affect, obviously locally and then regionally, and then looking at the United States as a whole. Are you guys thinking of taking any of this research? And I don't know, you were probably going to talk about it at the SAAs, I would imagine, but that's not going to happen anymore. But
No.
Are you like maybe through the book or something like that? Is there any thought right now to, I don't even know how I would do this, but to getting this information out and some of these programs and some of the successes you guys have had in dealing with these sorts of things to other areas of the country that might be experiencing similar things and not know how to deal with it?
So we have, we've tried to publish broadly, right? I mean, we have the research aspect of the project, which we've published pretty broadly, and not just the book, but also we have an article in Southeastern Archaeology and one in Journal of Archaeological Science Reports. This aspect, right, from the management aspect, getting this article out in Advances in Archaeological Practice was really important because people that are looking for ways to adopt tried and true methods in archaeology to changing situations would find this applicable to their work. And we have been contacted in the past by archaeologists working in other areas, maybe along a river or near a river where there have been flooding issues. And they wanted to know how we did this work and, could they see a copy of the NSF proposal that we wrote for the rapid funding? So I think the interest is there. I think that, do we have a dog and pony show to take it on the road? No. We have blogged some about it on the 30 Days of Tennessee Archaeology blog fest that happens annually in September for Tennessee Archaeology Awareness Month. So we have that as an avenue. And then, of course, doing things like this podcast is helpful to get the word out about the work that we've done and that hopefully other people can take what we've done and pull out of it something that's applicable to their situation and use it going forward.
Okay. And do you have any recommendations for, speaking of this podcast, there are a lot of people that listen to this that are not archaeologists and they're interested members of the public. They may know, nobody knows the local area like the people who live there, right? Nobody knows the rivers and the areas that are going to get affected by these. And they are probably the first people to see, for good or for bad, for the archaeology, the impacts and effects of large weather events and other natural disasters. Do you have any advice for them? If something happened like this in their area, what they should do, who they should probably try to contact, if they see something eroding out of a side after a big, or anytime really, but after a big rain or something like that, what should they do as members of the public?
I urge them to now go to their computers, right? Do this before anything happens. Find out who the contact is in your state. Typically, it is somebody, in the state archaeologist office. And of course, the state archaeologist is housed in a variety of different places depending on the state.
Sure.
So start there and, or Google archaeology in your state and find out who is the agency at the state level. Those are the ones to go to first, right? About this, because if it's out of their jurisdiction, then they can get in touch with the right people. The other thing that I urge is if people are interested in cultural resources in their area, they should look around to see if there are any community-based archaeology groups. So, for instance, here in Florida, we have the Florida Anthropological Society, which is overarching for the state, but there are chapters all around the state that are open to professionals and avocational people and people that are just generally interested in archaeology.
Nice.
I know the one here in Tallahassee is very active. They do field work, they do lab work, they do talks, outreach events. So they're very, very active. And in Tennessee, we have In Middle Tennessee, there's the Rutherford County Archaeological Society that started in about, I think it was 2014 is when it started. And they're very active, but you have to Google it. Look for them on Facebook. That's a good place to look, and make sure that you're dealing with legitimate organizations that are interested in preserving and protecting the cultural resources, right? There's a difference between those and other groups that are just interested in the artifacts. So I would urge people to do that now and find out who those contacts are now, so that when or if the time comes that they need to be contacted, they would know who to get in touch with.
That's all great information. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. And also I would say too, in Tennessee, there is the Current Research in Tennessee Archaeology meeting that happens annually. It's in January, and it's in Middle Tennessee somewhere, because it's the center of the state. So people can get there pretty easily. And it's free and open to the public. And this is where we first presented this research back in 2011, the first time we presented on this. Mm-hmm. And, there are lots of people that come that are just interested in archaeology that will come and see the talks, and it's really fun. And there are other opportunities like that in other states. So people should really, look around, because archaeologists have a presence online, whether it's Facebook or a website or a blog. So look to those to find something in your local area.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I just have one more question as we're wrapping up here.
Sure. Have
your thoughts on this topic, because you published this paper in November 2018. I know how publishing cycles work. You probably finished it well before that. So have your thoughts on this topic in the last 2.5 years changed in any way? Have they changed in any significant way for better or for worse?
From when we published this paper? No, I think that I stand behind this work 100%. I feel like we put so much effort into this project. Everybody did that worked on this project, whether it was, volunteering for a day or two, or that were with us from 2010 all the way to the publication of our book in 2019. Right. I'm proud of this work, and I think that it has, moved Tennessee archaeology forward in a very large way, and that these are sites that we knew relatively little about before the flooding episode, and then the opportunity for us to get in there and do some sampling and learn more about them. I mean, it really is pretty amazing what we were able to gain in terms of knowledge of the past out of this rather unfortunate, event.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think we'll cut it right there. Paul and I will be back in segment 3 to wrap up this topic. And for now, I'd like to say thank you, Dr. Tanya Peres, for coming on the show and talking about this.
Well, thank you, Chris and Paul. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, we appreciate the work you did. We enjoyed the article, and we're glad that we actually got to circle back and talk to you in specific about it, instead of just using it as a jumping off point for our own discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thanks. Take care. Be safe. Wash your hands.
Yeah, you too. Don't touch your face.
Oh,
don't touch your
too
face.
Late.
All right, so we're going to have a few messages from hopefully some of our sponsors and advertisers. And if you're interested in doing that, contact us at advertising@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com, especially with conferences being canceled. If you're a vendor, this is a great way to get your information out there to archaeologists and interested people. So we'll be back in just a second to wrap up this episode.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
All right, welcome back to episode 125. And, Paul and I were talking about the App of the Day segment, and when we have an episode that is just you and I, Paul, talking, maybe we can have an app or something like that. But I mean, to be honest, and we've talked about this before, we are always running out of apps, and I don't want to just go get random apps from the App Store just to talk about on this podcast, just to quote fill time. And so I think we had the idea to just kind of wrap up the topic that we just had, maybe give our final thoughts on the interview, and do something like that. And then Paul brought up a great point that, there isn't really much of a difference between archaeology and digital archaeology, which we've kind of mentioned. What were your thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, so we were discussing, and first of all, I got to say thanks again to Dr. Peres, because that article that we were reviewing was called "Seeing the Positive in the Negative," and here we are hunkered down with this COVID pandemic, and she brought so much enthusiasm to work she had done, and really, I can see why somebody like she would be looking for the positive and the negative. But as we were discussing, wrapping up afterwards. Like, you know what? We didn't even talk about tech with relation to that project. Yeah. We didn't mention a single bit of, maybe we mentioned a little bit about like databases or message boards or something kind of in passing, but it wasn't the centerpiece of anything. We didn't mention drones once, drink. And
there it is.
Yeah. And so... it just kind of struck me funny, because this could have been something that we, this could have been an episode on the archaeology show, for example, without changing a single thing. And so I was just kind of curious if maybe we discuss not so much that particular project or even necessarily what Dr. Peres said, but what our not going down the tech road with that particular interview says about tech and archaeology. And like you just said, we increasingly or decreasingly, I guess, see a difference between digital archaeology and archaeology. We see them both kind of as the same thing. The digital is a set of tools that we use, and whether that's on the low end word processors or all the way on up to very fancy equipment. So in the same sort of way that that we're not running out to find these apps to discuss on the App of the Day segment, maybe this is something of a maturing of how we view tech within our field. And I kind of wanted to riff on that a little bit with you. I don't know what your opinions are on it.
No, I agree. And, to be honest, that the reason that I wanted this podcast to exist, and I didn't start it, I definitely planted the seed for it when we first started the Archaeology Podcast Network over 5 years ago. I really wanted a podcast that talked about the intersection of technology and archaeology, which was incredibly relevant 5 years ago. I mean, people, even now, there are still people that they don't really understand how to use some of the more esoteric or I guess not really standard mainstream tech like drones, drink. And, it's, I really just need to have a drink. I mean, it's like 5 o'clock my time and 8 o'clock for you. I don't know why we don't have drinks. Just create our own drinking game. Speak for yourself. Fantastic. Anyway, so you're right. I mean, when we started this podcast, it was 5 years ago, and things change rapidly. And while we didn't necessarily talk about tech during this recording, it was obviously a huge part of the deal. And we really talked about the results of the tech without actually talking about the tech, which is basically any podcast that we'll ever do for any show, right? Because there's always technology involved, as you mentioned. So I think maybe we need to, moving forward, either rethink the types of things that we choose to talk about on this show, or rethink the types of interviews and topics that we got on. Because when we had Dan Bigman on to talk about GPR, we did get into some of the nuts and bolts of kind of how it works and the different things it can be used for, and that seemed more in line with the mission statement for this show. And I guess my question would be, what's the audience want? Do you guys want more nuts and bolts kind of stuff? Do you want us to bring somebody on that can give us not necessarily a step-by-step on how something works, but really how something works in a general sense, and then how they apply it to their field and what they did and the kind of results they can get to it? That I think would be more appropriate to an audio format. But, I'm just, I wonder what the audience thinks about that, really.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, because, again, you and I are both tech heads. We'll never remove tech as something that we explicitly, seek out and also, organize parts of our world, parts of our work around.
Right.
But you're right. It's not the purpose of using tech. It's the results. And you've said that a lot with digital field collection, how it allows you to do better, more consistent results, often faster, which means, more better and can be at less cost overall. Certainly in the data collection phase, but then as we've discussed before, also in the data analysis and publication and everything else. And it's always those results. That's what really, I think, even though we're tech heads, I think that's that results end of it, the distal end, the part that we don't really necessarily talk about so much. That's where we really get excited. That's certainly where I get most excited, is when I see interesting results and then kind of work it back through to look at the equipment used or the software used. It's not the equipment or the software per se.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, let's just put it out there. Check out our contact information in the show notes, or you can email me, chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. If you want to use Twitter, Paul is pretty active on Twitter. I try to get on there once in a while when I can, but Paul's more active on there than I am, I think. And let's hear what kind of stuff you want to talk about, because I'm just looking at the interviews we have coming up. And we've got Matthew Harpster coming on next time, and he wrote an article, or probably co-wrote an article, in Journal of Archaeological Science about a new way of modeling concentrations of maritime activity in the past based on the submerged archaeological record, which sounds super cool. I'm not sure what kind of technology he uses to do that. I mean, modeling is data collection and run some algorithms on it. And then Wesley Weatherby, after that, talking about the role of geophysics and photogrammetry, drones, and GIS, and contextualizing the past cultural landscapes. So, that's going to be probably pretty tech heavy too. But, when we sit there and talk to archaeologists about archaeology, typically it just ends up becoming a conversation about archaeology, unless we really bring it back to, method, which is, I think another good reason to kind of poll our audience and just get some really quick feedback and say, hey, do you want more nuts and bolts episodes, or do you want more application episodes? I'm fine either way, because I think they're both fun and entertaining, but which one should we do? And I think we're going to end up shifting to bring this back to the beginning of the segment. I think we're going to end up shifting to more application type stuff, because people are becoming familiar with at least the concepts or the names of different types of technology, like drones. We keep saying drones, but drones is such a buzzword right now, and people still don't really know how to apply them in their actual work. A lot of people, when we first started talking about drones, were like photogrammetry, take awesome pictures of structures and things like that we could never get before. But now there are people doing serious work with like drone survey. And we had somebody on, who was that? Was that Dr. Peter McKeague, I think it was? Or was that Hector Arengo? I can't remember looking at him here.
It was doing the...
Yeah, it was...
Oh, I think he had the article on how it was a kind of very nuts and bolts article, which was actually a very interesting one too to me, about how he did a survey, what elevation he flew the drones at, and looked at battery life and so on, and coverage. And, it was a very nuts and bolts thing, but it was an interesting cookbook. Yeah, so I think that we can have a wide range. I mean, I was also, just as you were talking there, I was thinking about the interview I did last year with Edward Gonzalez-Tennant, and he definitely is into GIS and is doing interesting things with his students with it. But the discussion really didn't touch on tech a whole lot. You weren't there for that interview, but
right.
But he was really excited about the ways that the tech allowed him to engage with the descendant communities of the towns that he was looking at, which was something that, I wasn't prepared to actually talk to him about that. I was ready to talk about GIS, but it was a very interesting discussion to me. And again, that gets back to the whole thing of the results. But I don't think it doesn't have to be an either or. We can jump back and forth. But wow, it's almost liberating to not necessarily have to foreground the tech always.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I looked it up. It was episode 121, Automated Archaeological Survey with Hector Arengo, because not only were they using drones to do survey, but then they were using machine learning algorithms to find pottery.
Right. Yeah, right. I wasn't there for that interview.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was super cool too.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is really where things are going. And that's the intersection of two different technologies and an application to actual archaeological field methods. And the thing you got to look at those when we talk about technology and archaeology is it didn't really have necessarily anything to do with drones, right? Drones were just the instrument used to gather the imagery. So you could do it with kites, you could do it with satellite imagery, depending on the size of thing you were looking for. I mean, obviously you're not going to find pottery with current satellite imagery unless you work for the Department of Defense and you can get there super close, I'm sure, sub-millimeter scale resolution that they have. But with the commercially available stuff, you might be able to find structures and things like that and create a machine learning algorithm to look for squares, or non-standard nature shapes, look for human-made shapes, things like that. Mm-hmm. So it really wasn't an episode about drones. I mean, we talked about drones, but it was an episode about taking pictures, creating an image, and then analyzing that image using machine learning algorithms, which I think I think machine learning algorithms in themselves are the wave of the future. And I'd love to get somebody on to just talk about those. Nothing in particular, just like, how do you make one? If you want to create an algorithm to do something, what does that process even look like? I actually have no idea, where would you even start? I know Google's got some resources for it. But how do you then, it's easy to say I have an image and then I applied a machine learning algorithm to that image. But what does that actually mean? You know what I mean? Like what are the nuts and bolts of how that works?
Right? One steel underwear. That middle step is the tough one.
It really is. It really is. So,
actually, another thing that I'm thinking of, and this is definitely going off on a tangent, but that's what I do, is at the school where I work, we often get asked for particular technical solutions to problems, and the problems that we get asked to solve are often interpersonal social problems. I mean, these are students, children that we're dealing with, and so though we're not shy of trying to apply technical solutions, we're always like, that's not the first place you should go. If you have a social problem, try to deal with socially. Try to teach kids why what they're doing is wrong, why it's not helpful, why it's harmful to somebody else, and so on, before we try and throw a whole bunch of filters and blocks and spyware and whatever else at the situation. Because then at the end of it, the kid that's learned empathy and learned how to see something through somebody else's eyes and learned why doing some antisocial behavior, for example, on their computer is a bad thing, and they learn to stop it. They get those tools with themselves. The one that just can't do it because we've locked them down, when they graduate, they haven't learned a thing about actually how to behave in a society. So this, again, it's a tangent, but it is another kind of tech is a tool set, but I always feel like it's got to serve a bigger, broader goal, and our broader goal as archaeologists is to understand the past. It's not play with the toys, even though you and I in particular, like playing with all those toys.
Well, and I think one of my other broader goals from a tech standpoint is to get technology to the point where people don't see it as technology. And what I mean by that is, you have somebody that's using their phone. Maybe they're not very good with their phone or something like that. It's a new Apple iPhone or an Android phone or something like that, or even a computer. And they're like, sitting in their car with their automatic windows and their, automatic sensing cruise control, or they're, making dinner in their smart oven or something like that. And they're doing these things and they're going, oh, I hate technology, but they're not considering all the tech around them that they just take for granted. And they're only talking about the new technology that they don't understand, or not even new, but just technology they don't understand. So I'd like to get some of this stuff that we talk about to where people do take it for granted. Then I think we'll have turned a corner, and we'll say, well, they won't say, well, I hate technology. They'll say, they'll know how to use it, and it'll just be part of our lives. Now, some things still piss us off, like Trimbles and sub-meter GPSs and total stations.
And people who use spaces and tabs in Word instead of tab stop.
Right. Oh my God. Spaces instead of tab stops. I tell you what. It just irritates the crap out of me. I mean, honestly, for a job interview, I just want to have somebody type up a document and say, here, give me a bulleted list. And if they space it over, they're fired, or they're not hired at all. It's like, you're done. Anyway, yeah, I want to get to the point where some of that stuff that we talk about is just old hat. It's just something that people use and they don't even consider it technology. It's just like, yeah, of course this is part of the project. Of course we're going to do this. So who knows? I don't know.
But a lot of discussions around this going down the road.
Yeah. And, I hate to bring this up again because we already had an entire episode devoted to this, and I'm sure people are sick of hearing about it. But the coronavirus and the current situation we're in, might be helping with that. And I want to, this goes along, circling right back to the title of the article we talked about, which is finding the positive in the negative, because the negative to this whole thing, if this persists for the next few months, for example, I just saw that the Institute for Field Research, who runs a lot of field schools in this country and abroad, I just saw an email today. They canceled their entire 2020 field season.
Yeah, I saw the tweet today.
Yeah, I mean, they're just like, they can't even get the planning done for it. And another company that I've worked with in the past, they sent me a proposal today that they're looking at bidding on, and they want to know if I can help out with the field work for it. And the project for the performance period starts in June. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's put in the proposal. But if we can't get into the BLM offices to do the lit search and the record searches, then we literally can't start the project. I mean, we could, but we'd be unethical in doing so because we don't know what the previous recorded resources are out there. And the knock-on effects of all this stuff are going to be, projects are going to get delayed. I was just talking to somebody today how, we could be in this shelter in place for some states, and probably all states coming soon. We could be in this situation until June. And that's, that's a long time. And that's a long time where people aren't able to do things. People are still doing field work right now, but the projects are trying to bid on and keep that field work going. That stuff could get more difficult to actually get and then get out into the field and actually do those things and keep those projects rolling. So what I'm trying to say here is I think we're going to lose a lot of companies. I think we're going to lose a lot of smaller companies that don't have the ability to make it through this. And if you're looking for a positive in that very big negative, well, the positive is the bigger companies, the bigger engineering firms that will end up surviving this and taking up the slack, they do have the money to experiment. They do have the money to bring in other technology and to look for efficiencies because they are so expensive to operate. They'll look for any way they can to save money. And that could be the positive. Maybe some of this technology just takes off because the bigger companies are winning more of the projects because the small ones are gone, and this technology is finding a foothold in archaeology. I'm not saying that's a good thing necessarily with all these big companies, but that could be one slight positive if you're trying to find a silver lining in this whole mess. So I don't know, just a little prediction.
I don't know. So again, we should just wrap this up. But for any of our listeners, if there are topics related to tech in the most transparent sense, and you'd like to hear more about them, we're definitely willing to talk about them. Let us know if you want us to stick more with the heavy duty tech, if you want us to broaden out more like the interview that we just had, and then see what tech pertains to it, and if it doesn't explicitly pertain to what we're discussing, if we can let it go, if you're okay with that, we'd really like to know, because I think that there's it's a broader world than what we've just been looking at so far.
Yeah, and expanding on that, if you are yourself a user of something that you think other people should be, and you're frustrated that they're not, and you think you're good at it, you probably are. If you're promoting it, give us a ring, send us an email, a tweet, go onto the website, and just book an interview, arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Right there in the sidebar says schedule an interview. You can just jump right on our calendar. So please do that and help other people come around to your way of thinking, and we'll tell them what it can be used for and really get that out there. So, all right. Well, with that, again, thank you to Dr. Tanya Peres for coming on. It's been a year and a half trying to get her back on the show after we talked about her paper anyway, but as with a lot of archaeology, it was still very relevant, and it was great to finally get her on. So thanks everybody for listening, and thank you again, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Stay safe. Wash your hands.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.